Hi guys, and welcome, Gnemon here. So, what's so complicated about Piglin Bartering? You drop them gold, they drop your stuff. What's so hard about it? Well, I didn't think it's a complex process either until I seen many other people doing it simply wrong for various reasons. In this video, we'll go in depth on how to set up a proper Piglin bartering system that will satisfy small, large, and very large needs. So what's all the fuss about? You lock a piglin, give him gold, close him up, and all the loot will go into the hopper below. It's great! The thing is, to give him the next piece of gold, you can for example check if the items have flown through the hopper below. But with trading, we can get vastly different quantities of items, so that would delay in some cases the next trade. Since Piglin trade every 120 ticks exactly, we can run the trading on a clock. Yes, but that would make the system unnecessarily bulky. Clocks are not small. So I think for the simplest and the most basic Piglin trading system, we can just place them on carpets. This will raise them a little bit, making them clip into the blocks above their head. We would then need a piston to push the cap block in their head, but that would allow them to pick an item that lands right on top of them, making, with a torch and a wooden pressure plate and a dropper, a very simple trading setup. We can even share the dropper between two Piglin cells, making the setup even smaller. To get it going, we just need to feed the gold from the top, press the button to reset the dropper, and they will start picking the gold, triggering the dropper for the next round. To stop it, just grab the gold yourself, thus stopping the pressure plate. Players where they climbed and trapped over here can grab the ingot so it doesn't even trigger the pressure plate. Now that setup with the shared dropper is not ideal because if the pigman goes towards the opposite corner of the 1x1 hole, like so, we will be technically out of reach if the gold ingot lands on the opposite side of the block. But this can be easily remedied by just blocking these path options for them with a slab, for example, or you can always revert to a single core version as well with this one dropper per piglin. Another variant of the same kind of slow up to the hopper speed bartering, albeit without the hoppers in this case, is if you have to fit a piglin in their 2-block space, we can use soul sand instead. And now, since 1.16, it's a fully functional full block for the redstone, so we can have a pressure plate on the top, torch on the side, but the only exception is the fact that items will actually sink into a little bit deeper, meaning that they'll go deep enough the soul sand block that mobs that are 1.99 blocks high, like zombies, villagers, or piglins, would be able to reach them. So that would be it, but bartering is a little bit special. First of all, we get a lot of different stuff from it. Most things are stackable to 64, but we can also get ender pearls that are stacked to 16, as well as a few non-stackable and not really interesting items. Second of all, we get them at a pretty significant rate. On average, from my experiments, it turned out that we get 7 items for 1 gold ingot, meaning that the output stream of items doesn't match in the slightest the delivery of gold ingots. And the thing about bartering is that the count of items for each stack we can get can be huge. Up to 36 for iron nuggets, and getting specific item, mainly due to the simple fact that there is a lot of different types we can get, is actually very rare. This means that in order to properly sort items from a bartering system, we not only need to take care of the number of different items of each type, but also their distribution. But just in plain numbers, one piglin can sort through more than 4,000 items per hour in the output, meaning that a simple sorting system, an item collection with a hopper, are all limited to 9,000 items per hour, so it's 2 piglins max. We can very easily double the collection speed by just running a second line of hoppers below the existing hoppers. This way we'll have a second channel that will suck in most of the items, and then the top line of hoppers will act as an excess above the baseline 9,000 items the bottom hopper pipe makes. But this still would mean that we need to double the sorting system to handle just these items. So the question is having a double core, single thread per core Piglin GPU or gold processing unit sufficient? The answer is, it depends. If you have one of these super simple, quick and dirty but rather slow gold farms where you can get less than 10,000 golden nuggets per hour, you might be fine with just 2 piglins converting the items while you AFK to get gold for the next round. But if you have a farm that is significantly faster, you'll need much more complex solution. Like with this one. This is my gold farm from the previous episode with the looting option that you need at least 10 piglins trading at the same time into 5 parallel sorting streams just to keep up with the rate of the gold that flows out of this farm. You might also notice that this farm is a little bit different than the design I showed 2 episodes ago. And that's something that I'm sometimes really bad at, is to clearly convey which part of the design have to stay exactly as I showed it for various reasons, and where you can actually cut some corners and maybe not get the ideal max XP and max rates, but close to that with less effort. So this is just a variant of the farm that I just showed previously. Because the previous one had 19 floors and you had to be very lucky with your location over a huge lava lake with not that many places to spawn proof, or you need to do a lot of spawn proofing. In this case, which was a specification by Iskulls, the location was fixed, so what I've done instead was to check what is the lowest spot for the AFKing, to only include just a few caves and ravines under the bedrock layer without encroaching too much into the nether flat areas, which would require much more spawn proofing to do. And from that I just added 128 blocks to get to the position of the player, added 24 more blocks to get to the first spawning floor, and just divided the remaining space by 3 to get a possible number of spawning floors. Since we ended up with half of the spawning floors than in the original design, to keep with the number of spawning spaces, each floor needed to be twice as large, meaning a square root of twice as large in the radius. So just extending the floor really in each direction by 4 more extra blocks, and that's pretty much sealed the deal. I'm honestly quite surprised of the output of the farm. I was expecting like 70-80% of the original performance, but you get here only 6,000 to 7,000 less drops compared to the max XP version, so it's more like 93% of the original performance. Obviously the cactus is not needed, as we should be able to ingest all the XP no matter what, but gold wise is still very good, and far less spawn proofing to do below the nether. Obviously the other AFK point that doesn't require any spawn proofing for regular AFK is just up here, and is also fine. If you want to build this design in your particular location and you have a fixed spot, that's the kind of process that you should go through. Just check how low you're willing to go before you need to start to spawn proof large nether plains, and then just add 128 blocks for the player position, 24 blocks to the first floor, and then figure out how many platforms you can squeeze. And then this would dictate how large they need to be, and you should be fine. If you are interested in this particular variant with fewer floors, I'll add it to the download for the gold farm episode. But in a sense, it's exactly the same design as before, just shorter but girthier. But speaking of converting gold into bartered goods, having 5 sorting systems pumping items at the same time for 10 pigmen is not the best idea. What if you have even a faster gold farm? This doesn't make sense. What would be the best is to separate the gold farm from the bartering system, and this would give us more freedom in terms of where we would put the bartering station in your world. And you can also share it between multiple players on a server wanting to exchange their own goods. In this case, the faster the bartering setup, the better. In general, oftentimes separating a project into multiple independent components gives much more flexibility for each one of them. For instance, in 1.16 there is a new option of having a new mushroom tree farm that you can design to as a single contraption that creates a small fungi, grows them and recycles them back into the bone meal to grow the next tree and to get the new small little mushrooms to plant them. But it might be much simpler and much more effective to do it in 3 stages. Separate contraption to collect the seed mushrooms, then separate farm to get the bone meal, for example from bones, and then a separate tree farm that we don't need to worry about seedlings and bone meal, where you can just focus, for example, on TNT efficiency. So technically you have more options with that. Same with the gold bartering. If you assume that you bring the gold with you from whatever gold farm you have, it all becomes much simpler, and in all fairness, the gold still needs to be crafted into at least ingots, so it cannot be fully streamlined process anyways. And you can focus on other aspects like speed and simplicity. The thing is, if you just came from a gold AFK session with an inventory full of gold, you might not want to necessarily spend the same time waiting for the piglins to trade all this stuff, because your sorting system is not keeping up. If you have a separate bartering system from a gold farm, whatever your source of your gold is, it has to be super quick, otherwise it's pointless. And that's what this setup over here is all about. And I think it's a much better way to trade. First of all, no hoppers. Since once items are in the hopper, you are limited by hopper processing speed, you might as well just sort them out and go through that inefficient regular sorting process. Second thing is, what's cool about Piglin is they actually treat the gold fairly. If you drop more than one item in a stack, like in this case I have 11, they'll only pick one item from that stack at a time, leaving the rest for the gold for other Piglins, which is actually really cool. That's actually something that hadn't worked this way in the past. Mobs had the tendency of stealing entire stacks of items, but it's different with gold and Piglins, and that's good. The third aspect of Piglins is that when they see a player, instead of throwing it at their feet, they actually throw it at the player. And their aim, unlike for example skeletons and stuff, is actually immaculate. And those items will always be thrown exactly the same way. So for fast bartering, we can just simply collect Piglins in groups by dropping them in the same one-by-one hole, and we can rely on the fact of seeing the player to deliver the goods. And the last thing that I would really strongly recommend is either collect Piglin guys with swords, or let the crossbow ones just use up their crossbows before you put them in. Which has recently been verified by Zizuma Void that they will actually lose their crossbows once they run out of durability, same as pillagers. Even if you are just super meticulous in wearing some golden armor pieces not to aggro them, you don't want them to shoot you when you, for example, reach out for a gold chest or to get to some containers on the sides. The fact is that when they are aggro, this doesn't affect their bartering, and that's the most important thing. The easiest way to capture Piglins, in my opinion, assuming you need the bartering setup so you have tons of gold, is just to give them some gold parts of the armor that they're missing. This way they don't respawn in you and you can save on name tags. Then you can just let them chase you without the gold armor into your predefined area. So in this particular setup I have spawned 15 Piglin in each space, so we here rock a dual core 15 threads per core gold processing unit. I've heard stories about mobs when crammed in one spot causing lag. That's why we have max cramming, and that's why you want to build it as a separate thing in your world that's outside of all your pretty places. And that's how you want to honor max entity cramming. If you have less than 20-30 mobs in one spot, it's not really that bad. Cramming gets really bad if you store hundreds of mobs in one spot. However, you can still mitigate some of the issues by placing a vine at their feet. You would want to collect Piglins first and drop them first without the vine, otherwise some of them would decide to climb on it, which wouldn't be great. But once you have them all filled in and capped with a block, they would stay here, so you can't really sometimes place the vine in that area. In this case, you just need to break this trapdoor, reverse it, like so, and this way you can shift-click the vine into their space by placing it against the trapdoor. And then once it's done, you can just replace the trapdoor into the correct position as it was before. It's good to keep those trapdoors like here for the future in case they traded something without seeing you and then they get angry at you and just want to collect your stuff. You just then need to block their view and collect your things, like that. So this is what I think would be the best setup really on a middle scale. So you're not on a super technical server, but you have a gold farm and you need to get resources quickly. This here double core 30 threads GPU will convert a chest of gold in a matter of couple minutes into goods. And there are two ways to do it, and actually both are fine. First one is to drop a couple stacks of gold at a time in the block just in front of them. All of those piglins should be able to pick it, and then just once they drop items at you, just manually sort them into the respective chests. This way, we're actually trading 120,000 items per hour. In this case, to have a sorting system that will keep up with it, this might not be worth it. And manually dropping traded goods into chests could actually be the best option. And it still would take you just a couple minutes to do that. The only thing that you need to have is all the chests available within reach for the piglin to constantly throw things at you. But even if you move away and some stuff lands on their feet, you can just collect it at the end through the corner of the block, as I showed before. Another option, just a little bit more automatic, is to dump all your trading gold into these chests, allowing the dropper to drop the gold within their reach. And that's where the magic number of 30 piglins comes from. Because what you can do, you can just close them up, engage the clock, and then they'll be processing the gold exactly the same speed as your fast item dropper. So 18,000 gold ingots per hour on the input, producing 120,000 traded items in the output. So in terms of a simple but adequate solution, I would definitely recommend this dual-core 30-threaded solution. A few minutes spent on organizing the loot into what you need from this massive flow of items and what's garbage for you is really not a big deal when you are saving yourself a huge sorting system that would not be used most of the time. But if you want to be crazy and just hate manual labor, even if you are just saving a couple minutes for the sake of spending hours on building the sorting system, you seem to be like a technical player. So behold this octa-core 192 threads gold processing unit. 24 threads per core, so the Mojang approved maximum of mobs per single spot, times 8, organized in a circular fashion around the player spot, so we can collect items automatically and hopperless. Obviously the vines over here and their feet are installed here not to prevent entity cramming, but to decrease the CPU load. Another trick I used here is I placed the whole setup on the chunk corners, because when entities query other entities within a chunk, you don't always want for them to consider all 200 piglins that are here every time. For some simpler operations where the only immediate neighbors are being checked, placing them in separate chunks helps. It's not that much, but the difference is actually noticeable. Player stays in the middle on this flower pot, which allows all the items thrown by the piglins to fall right below it, and there are lots of chests around us for both modes of operation of this bartering contraption. First mode is very simple, actually both modes are simple. We just get to the middle, we put the gold to be traded in the chest right above each pair, and with a filled inventory we just Ctrl Q full chests of gold at once for each quadrant. Going with a full chest like I'm doing here takes for the piglin 3.5 minutes to go through it, so you could technically drop even one more line of gold and it would still be as fine. But in total, converting 2 double chests of gold at once in 3.5 minutes I think is good enough, at 800,000 items per hour. And that's how you trade like a boss. I wouldn't even try to put in the manual chest for yourself, like with the 30-threaded GPU we had over there. You just won't be able to do this at this speed, just put it in the chests. So what happens to those items we'll see in a moment, because it's still quite complicated. But all in all, this just looks awesome. Another option is just to drop items around the piglins with droppers. In this case, I use this just single dropper and I'm just limiting myself to use 30 piglins per quadrant for trading. So if that's the only way you plan to use it, you can just reduce number of piglins to 15 per slot, so 120 total, and this will still give you a speed of 500,000 items per hour bartered. But you can just add some extra droppers if you want to maximize the piglin use. It is quite a bit laggy in here, and that's why you would want to build it in some secluded area and just bring the gold over here in shulker boxes and just haul back the resources, or store the goods over here and just treat it as a storage unit. With this setup you can technically barter constantly, but honestly manually dropping chests full of gold should be sufficient for most people. Yo! We have to interrupt your evening entertainment programming to let you know that this material has been shot in Minecraft 1.16.1, which is the current official version of this game. Bartering loot has already been tweaked for 1.16.2 and will likely be adjusted in the future, so following estimates that you will see in a moment apply to 1.16.1. But the general setup doesn't change. It just means that you're able to collect different materials with different quantities, so your sorters layout will need to be different. Now let's go back to the pre-recorded material. So that would be it in terms of bartering, but to sort all of those items is not that straightforward. There are several things that make this kind of sorting quite unique. First of all, there is a lot of items. You have 800,000 in total for this setup. So after a short test, you can see that's a lot of gravel, followed closely by soul sand, nether bricks, string, leather, quartz, iron, and other small fractions. Second thing, all of those things, they don't come in a steady stream of items. Piglins drop significant amount of these resources rarely, meaning that in each batch, it's equally probable we might not get any string or any iron, As we'll be so lucky with iron or string, it will require a crazy number of sorters to inject all of these things. So you might be thinking, well, that's why we have systems where jobs go into circular fashion, making sure that everything that needs to be picked up is picked up. Well, in this case we're also ending up with ridiculous amounts of unstackable trash. Believe me, even if you think right now that all those books and potions are super valuable, you'll be so done with them after you trade a few stacks of gold. It's not even a joke. So you can't just infinitely cycle the items, because that would lag your game to death. So what I've done with this sorting system is come up for a typical Piglin Bartering scenario with the balance of sorters allowing to grab all the valuable resources items from most of the piles that result of one round of trading. This means that overflow can still happen, but should be rather infrequent. The idea is to run a pile of items over sufficient number of sorters to grab all the stuff most of the time, and in rare cases where we check that there are still valuable things in the pile, we can cycle it back in. In terms of sorters, those are not your standard sorters, but the double speed sorting slices as proposed by Jelly and Pala Pala, if I'm not mistaken. Very similar to the regular impulses with item sorters, but with a sorting hopper pointing down into another hopper that is full. This allows for the sorting hopper to both push items out as well as the bottom item to suck items out of it. At this point, I'm not collecting these items per se, but you have to assume that those items will be flowing here more than at a hopper speed. So these wool blocks in the simplest form could be just replaced with double chests, or if you want even more storage, you need to use 2 hoppers per each chest to siphon the items out. Alternatively, you can just put some sugar balls packers in this space, just making sure that they can handle a double hopper speed. In case you know that you'll be doing just small amounts, and just by small amounts I mean a few double chests of gold at once, you could be fine just by having some simple containers as buffers like chests and then run hopper lines feeding into one single chest. But that kind of defies the purpose of a fast and massive bartering system. You might as well just use the manual setup, that's probably best for you. The problems with the sorters up top is the hopper will get cooled down when it's pushing items out, so sending items at regular intervals would make it miss items half of the time. But in this case not a problem, because it takes little over 5 seconds to reset the sorter from maximum capacity and takes Piglins 6 seconds for one barter round, so it still checks out. Meaning that between each pile of items we'll always make sure that these hoppers are empty and ready to accept more items. To help us see which sorters are actually busy at a given point of time, I attached here redstone lamps to each end of the sorter. This is completely not necessary. This is like all lighting here, and rods especially, it's all optional, but it's a good way of visualizing the sorting progress, and they also indicate sorters that are overflowing as well. To create batches of items, I detected them falling on this tripwire, which refreshes this clock, which is slightly slower than the cooldown timer for the sorters, which, as you can see, gets filled up shortly after they get rid of the previous items. Obviously, in terms of item alignment, we cannot just use water here since we are in the nether, and piglins require to be in the nether not just to trade, but to live. So we have here little choice but to use slime blocks and push the items around. Optionally, you can just send the items to the overworld and do the sorting over there if you want to, but that's not really necessary. At first we drop them pushed by this honey block, which is a very unique block that's not so full on all sides, but still can be pushed by a piston. It is perfect to making sure that items are technically on the ice, but actually part of them are still on the hoppers. And this allows the sorters to suck in all the items. In general, I use here tripwires to detect passing items to send them around, but you can detect them with pressure plates or just force synchronize all of them into one big clock with redstone. Automatic detection is better and cleaner and simpler, but you have to make sure that nothing can spawn in here, otherwise items will be getting stuck if there's some mob sitting over here on this tripwire. And you can do it in multiple ways, for example covering the ice path with full blocks, one block over. That would prevent spawning and prevent mobs from getting into it. Now, in the nether is not that simple anymore. We have various different biomes and each of those needs a different form of spawn proofing, but in all cases it can be easily done. At the ends of this long sorter straights, items typically have very little momentum left, so stopping them on non-slippery blocks is sufficient, but on the corners you have to use a different method depending on which side your sorters are. Here, for example, since items need to stay primarily on the ice blocks, I align them against the chests. Pretty standard stuff. But if you hop over here, we actually have an opposite situation. We want to overshoot the items so that they mostly stay on this side of the block, on the ice. And for that, I use here double pickle block. Now, the good block for that would have to have a really weird hitbox, but also cannot be movable by piston. And I found two of them. First is a single turtle egg or a double pickle. However, turtle eggs are not only very delicate, but also have a very weird property. I don't know if you noticed, but on two edges they have 3 pixels gap to the full block, and on the other side they have 4. I mean, you can use them instead of an overworld compass, I guess, to find which is north and south, east and west. On the other hand, pickles are symmetrical with 3 pixel spacing on each side, so that's what I'll be using here. At the end of the loop for the ender pearls, I use standard single speed hoppers filters, and the reason being ender pearl sorters have very limited capacity, only for a few ender pearls, so passing them every 5 seconds is enough for them to get empty on a single speed hopper. There's no need for a double speed sorters over here at all. So on the return, due to random chances and big variance in the stacks of items we can get in one round, it is possible, as I said, that not all items that we care to collect will get collected, and for that we have these sorters over here that pick up just one item from each pile, and if that one item was the one that you want to keep, instead of dropping the pile to the overflow, which in this case is a very handy cactus storage, we stop them and add them to the next pile for a second round. Obviously, if we just disable the overflow, we can just get rid of all of the system over here and just drop this all what's left on the cactus. But I assume the reason you want to trade the piglins to get these valuable resources and not to trash them. In terms of the number of sorters for each item, that actually took quite some time to figure out the minimum required sorters to grab all of the items from most piles. For gravel with this volume, we had to use 15 sorters, that's 15,000, over 15,000 items per hour each, so we are overshooting twice in terms of what you would expect just by looking at the pure rates. And that seemed to be necessary to grab all the lucky gravel sessions as well. Obviously, if you have space and resources, you can just add more slices, like in this case I disabled some of the sorters because they were not really necessary, but including more makes the chance of hitting the limit less and less frequent. So the setup here is the result of a quite rigorous tuning for the entire 800,000 per hour bartering setup from this 8-core 192 GPU. So your setup might differ based on the number of piglins you have collected, which items are important to you, and which one you want to void. It's all based on your individual needs. For some interesting cases that just result from the pure distribution of items, I needed more sorters for iron nuggets than for leather and quartz, despite bartering yielding significantly less iron than quartz and leather, from the simple fact that iron is very rare, but when you get it, you get a lot of it, like in stacks up to 36 items. So the variance on the iron output is actually significantly larger than on quartz or leather. Last note about the overflow catchers: if you just don't care about a specific item and you are fine with overflowing it, like for example fire chargers or magma cream, just don't include them into the overflow section. This way, whatever doesn't fit in your storage will just be removed together with all the non-stackables. So I would assume that you would definitely want to monitor overflow on quartz, gravel, obsidian, but the rest of the items can probably be ignored if it doesn't fit the sorting hoppers. And what goes into this particular section, it's entirely up to you. It's me, back again from the future. Here's the comparison on trading rates from 192 piglins in 1.16.1 and 20W20A, which is a snapshot for 1.16.2. It is important to note that there will be about 20% less items from bartering in terms of the volume, with a welcome addition of Blackstone, which is now renewable, and Spectral Arrows, which is now a new trash. But that also means that it will be very easy to craft a bow and use a ranged weapon if you want to play Nether's only survival, for example. Soul Sand also has been greatly reduced, which I think is fine, as Soul Sand, unlike regular sand, has very few uses. It hurts to see less quartz, and with the new water bottles, it's now possible to craft potions in the Nether, but you would need to go through unstackable trash to fish them out. And again, this all might still change. However, our trading setup in general, as I presented here today, it's still valid. Feel free to ping me in the future if you want me to adjust the sorter setup for the new ratios once the final 1.16 is out. Links to those you will find in the description below. So that's it, guys. A super simple but very limited bartering setup, adequate for small and slow gold farms, or something completely overpowered that converts up to 10,000 gold in 5 minutes, or just something super simple like these two 1x1 holes with piglins in them, where you can chuck a fair amount of gold at them and get them very quickly converted within minutes in a small and very compact space, with which you can just barter like a boss. Bartering is a very cool mechanic. It's much simpler than villager trading. Maybe you don't get as many types of items, but at least you don't need to click in their UI to do that. Let me know in the comment section below what's your opinion about it. I wish they made more use for the soul sand, allowing someone to convert it into a regular sand, since there is no sand in the nether. I hope you all found this video interesting, informative and maybe a bit amusing. And if you did, don't forget to leave me a like, subscribe if you are new for more such content in the future, and see you in the next one. Bye bye!